From Canada, Citizens Forum, where we look at the important issues of the day through a lens of democracy and media and try to figure out, how do we build a better country for ourselves? Hello, welcome to Citizens Forum. It is Monday, February the 10th, 2025. Citizens Forum comes to you from Victoria, British Columbia. We try to take a Canadian perspective on things. And for me, the underlying theme of the show is, and that's only for me, that the lack of democracy in Canada is the most important underlying problem. And it underlies so much else. You know, we think we've got a housing problem, which we do. We've got a homeless problem, which we do. We've got a healthcare problem and an environmental disaster. But those are the symptoms. The real root problem is our lack of democracy and our lack of a free press here in Canada, with the big media being owned so much by the corporate sector, big business. And we'll go into that on another show. So, for example, if you take a look at the very important issue of housing and the cost of living, I think that if we had a better democracy in Canada, then we wouldn't have this problem, or the problem would at least be much, much less than it currently is. Because when I look around at the high rents and the high mortgage prices and the homeless disaster and the general high cost of living, I don't think this has happened by accident. I think this is the plan. It's a transfer of wealth from average Canadians, and the money is moving up the ladder to the banks, the speculators, the financiers, the big development companies, and et cetera. And they've done this to us deliberately. They've created this. And if we had more democracy in Canada, we could protect ourselves from this kind of thing. But the corporate sector and what I call the 0.01%, they control our governments. Our governments, in my opinion, do not work for us. They work for the corporate sector and the very rich. And the same with the media. And they have the power to create a disaster like the housing mess and the healthcare crisis as well. And they profit from those things, and we pay. And because of this control of government and media by the people who are doing it to us, we never hear about it. So, for example, a few weeks ago, we had a guest on, a professor from UBC, who said a possible solution to this whole problem is, in fact, not only is it a solution, but if we'd done it 20 years ago, because we used to do it 30 years ago, but if we'd done it 20 years ago because we stopped, then we wouldn't have this mess. And the solution he talked about was a very high tax on profits from land sales. Now, maybe he's right and maybe he's wrong. But to me, the remarkable thing is it's never talked about. Our politicians and the media are always telling us how much they care about the housing mess and the high rents and the high prices and the facts that more and more Canadians can't afford to eat. They always pretend they care, but they never talk about one solution, which is, I mean, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but it's put out there by experts. And yet we, the people of Canada, are never even told about it. And nor are we told about the idea that there are about 1.3 million vacant homes in Canada, according to the OECD. Now, again, maybe that number's right, and maybe it's wrong, but it's put out there by a very serious group of researchers. And yet, once again, we Canadians never hear about it, so it doesn't enter the discussion, and the housing disaster goes on and on and on. So that is to me, the real problem is this lack of democracy, where we Canadians don't have a voice. We don't have a say in our own governance. And plus, the media doesn't work for us. So with that beginning underway, we're going to start the show with an interview with Mehdi Najari. Mehdi is also here in Victoria. And Mehdi, we're going to talk, you want to start talking about the current situation between Canada and the United States with the beginning, I guess, of the Trump presidency. So thank you, Mehdi.
Yes, I wanted to remind people what has happened here with the Canadian and American economic relation. In 1988, if you remember, we had the free trade election that Mr. Mulroney pushing. He was going to United States with Mr. Reagan, singing together solidarity song between the corporate Canada and corporate United States, and they pushed the free trade. At that time, many critics were saying, "Don't Canada should not put all its eggs in the same one basket of United States, because they will control our policies." The big business in Canada rejected that and said that will never happen because we are all cousins and we don't do these type of things to each other. United States is not Russia or China, and so on and so forth. So they did it. In 1994, if you remember, after the passage of free trade, then the new government of Mr. Chrétien came and said, "Oh, we have too much deficit and we have to cut." So he started the austerity program. At the same time, he went with the Team Canada, quote unquote, Team Canada. They went a trip to China with more than 500 business leaders from Canada and the premier of all the provinces of Canada. So they went and signed lots of agreements, but United States didn't like that. United States wanted Canada to be dependent economically to United States only. And all the raw material that Canada is shipping out go to United States. So by 1996, when the Harper government came to power, they started the criticism. Harper government, following the orders of United States, start criticism of the China and created a very muddy relationship with China. And then, as you know, in 2008, they were talking about the North American Union to bring Canada and United States together. And then when Mr. Trudeau came to power in 2015, he started again going to China and having some relation, but pretty soon he gave in to American pressure. And what he did in the first Trump administration, he, under the order of United States, he arrested Ming Wanzhou, the Chinese business leader from Huawei, and kept her here for 2 years on the order of United States for no reason.
Yes, under house arrest.
Under house arrest, yeah. And because China did not, or her company did not respect American law that passed about sanctioning Iran,
right?
If you remember,
right.
So American can pass any law, but that doesn't mean other people in other country and companies should follow American law, So, but then they had to release her because it was going nowhere for them, and they destroyed the relationship with China. If you remember, then they start talking about Chinese interference in our election.
Yes.
For 3-4 years, every day they talk about this. They talk about the traitors in our parliament. And yes. By that, they mean they were insinuating the Chinese Canadian, yes. MP are traitors. This is unbelievable level of racism and stupidity of our politicians. So what's happened? We had the inquiry by Judge Hogue, and she looked at everything and come out and say, there is no evidence of any interference.
Yes, yes.
It was,
and what was interesting is that we had, as you said, years of stories about secret police stations and foreign interference and all of this, day after day after day. But when the story comes out that the person investigating it says there's nothing there, that's a one-day story, and yes. Then it's gone. And a week later, it's back again, the same old foreign interference, Chinese interference. Right? Yeah, it's the way the media this is how they control us, by just telling us stories which may or may not be true. I don't believe any of it anymore, but they just make up the news.
Yes,
And if we believe it, we're damaging ourselves.
and we because they, quote unquote, we need a democracy, which is the oligarchy of the big business here. But but they tell us we live in democracy, so whatever our free media tell us, we should accept and believe it. So that is what has been happening, and all of those accusations was coming from CSIS.
Yes.
Our Canadian security agencies.
Yes.
And Canadian security agencies are in line with CIA and MI6 in UK. So they hatch up stories in order to push the interest of the ruling elite in these countries, US, Canada, and UK. But now Mr. Trump come in the second term, so we already are colony of United States economically. So now he wants one step further, which is total annexation of Canada into United States. And people are really waking up and see that all the lies they told us about the free trade is being exposed now. But what's happened? The same group of business leaders, the multinational leaders that are some of them in Canada are dealing with multinationals, the same group of business leaders that's supporting the free trade, now they are coming out and say, oh, the problem is Canada has to become competitive. So what's happening? The same corrupt politician like Dave Eby, like all the other ones.
Dave Eby, for those who don't know, is our premier, our NDP premier here in British Columbia.
Are pushing the project that the mining and oil industry and other big fat corporations wanted. Now, under the cover of threat from Trump, they are pushing those in.
Yes.
Without any environmental assessment or nothing. So they are going to destroy our country,
yes,
under our resources, under the cover of we have to fight with Trump, which is all lies, So people of Canada should really pay attention. Don't let, because they created this so-called crisis of Mr. Trump doing, under the cover of that, destroy Canada environmentally. And they have been doing that for many years, but many of their project was because of the public pressure and First Nation. Now they are going to push, for example, the Highland copper mine expansion in Thompson Plateau near Logan Lake, which First Nation very vociferously opposed it. They are destroying the First Nation land. But under the cover of Trump threat of tariff, they are pushing all this through, and probably people will not oppose that much. And that's the problem that I really think people should pay attention. And this is happening all over Canada. It's not just BC. For example, in BC, again, the Red Crest mine that the First Nation in Alaska oppose it. It belonged to imperial minerals, the same imperial minerals that created the huge mass in I forgot the name now.
Mount Polley.
Mount Polley.
Yes.
So,
and for those who don't know, it was the largest environmental disaster in Canadian history.
In North America even.
Yeah.
And then what's happening, for example, if you look at all the oil well that's supposed to be rehabilitated, put in place without the environmental damage continuing, it costs about $400 to $500 billion that the industry is supposed to do it. They are not doing it. They are going to use the resources and put everything on the back of the Canadian people to fix.
And Mehdi, let me just comment on that. I think what that means is all the oil wells that have been dug, we're talking more about Alberta, but it's the same here in BC and no doubt other provinces as well, they have to be capped in some way or they will continue kind of forever leaking something into the atmosphere. So they have to be capped or somehow dealt with. And the idea always was that the industry would do that. That was always the story. But now that the oil wells are finished with and nobody wants them anymore, the industry just disappears and the public is left with the massive multi-billion-dollar cost of dealing with those oil wells and the gas fracking wells as well.
And one last said in that regard is let's compare Canada to Norway. In Norway, they exploit their oil resources, but they have more than $1.5 trillion national fund as a result of asking for 70-80% royalty for the oil. We here in Canada give our oil away for next to nothing, and we have all these costs that we have to deal with. So what's going to happen? The last thing I would say about this is this. If you ask a few questions, what's happened after 1988 free trade? Do we have much more poverty? Do we have much more homelessness in the street? Of course we have. So because of all these trade that they promise us bring prosperity, it's brought to Canadian people poverty, homelessness, and despair. And we are going to have more of this coming if we continue listening to these crooked business leaders that they don't think about anything except their own gain and using every crisis to jump in and profit from it. If we continue with this in this regard of opening of more mining and devastation and oil and pipelines, we are going to, and fracking, we are going to devastate this country more and create more poor and homelessness in this country.
Mehdi, I think you are very, very right in what you're saying. And again, it comes down to we Canadians are irrelevant. I mean, why wouldn't we want to charge the oil companies higher royalties and be as prosperous as Norway with its $1.5 trillion sovereign fund?
And but not much poverty or homelessness.
Yes, exactly. But with us, we're never told. We trust our governments. They sell us out. We think the media is watching over our governments. They're not. And this is where we end up, and it's only going to get crazier. Mehdi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate it. Talk again in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mehdi. And Norm, you were going to talk about, first, I'll just say that, what Mehdi has said, I think it just goes down to that same old issue of the lack of democracy and the lack of a free press here in Canada. It's killing us in many, many ways. For me, I'm doing okay. I've got no big problems, but how many people in Canada, how many millions of people are just getting by and things are getting worse and there's no need for it? Norm, you wanted to talk about my co-host, Norm Ryder. You wanted to talk about the tariff issue and how it ties in with President Trump and things that were happening before Mr. Trump became president.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I'll just say that I agree with a lot of what Mehdi was saying about the tariffs. And I'll give you a little bonus I didn't warn you about. I think I know why Trump wants to take over Canada.
Okay, let's have it.
I started looking at it that he's going to take over Greenland, Canada, and he's already assumed he's in control of Gaza. Now, what do those three places have in common? And Greenland and Canada have the potential for a lot of rare earths. Now, we're not mining very much here, and China's mining 70%. But we have the potential between Greenland and Canada to have more. Gaza also has, surprisingly, a fair amount of rare earths there. And it sort of made me start wondering, now, why is Trump after these places with the rare earths? What, other than Musk's need for more electronic gadgets, etc., what is the need for all this rare earth. And it sort of fell into place. That's exactly what he's going to take over. And at least in his mind, I think he's a little delusional. A lot of things he's going to mine and take all the rare earths from Canada and Greenland.
Right.
I mean, well, I don't have a lot of respect for Trump. But getting back to the tariffs, there's a big noise about how terrible the tariffs are, and we have to do all these things that Trump has told us we have to do to stop the tariffs. Well, when I started looking at it, I realized, and I'll just share a screen here for a moment if I can. Where are you? Look at the date here, December 17th, 2024. And the Government of Canada announces a plan to strengthen border security in our immigration system. Well, you go through here, they're also talking about improving or disrupting the fentanyl trade. And you go down a little further. One of the big things that Trump extracted from us, I'll just see if I can find it here. Oh yeah, here we are. The government also proposed to the U.S. the creation of a North American Joint Strike Force to target transnational organized crime. Well, Trump's making a big issue about him having done that, or got that out of us, as well as the increased border security and the rest of that. Well, this was done before he even came into power.
Yeah, so it happened after the election, but before he became president.
Well,
do you think they were already beginning to,
well, what I was going to say is you don't come up with a program like this in December without having been talking about it, we'll just say
that's
in
very
September.
true. Yeah.
So it was well underway long before Trump was an issue. So what did he get? Now, I had a couple more share screens, but I think I'll leave those alone for now. And where we are. There we are. And Trump got almost nothing for this 1 month. He's making a big thing that he's made the agreements. Mind you, I'll give him a bit of credit. Maybe he has got something out of us. That we have a program to stop the international trade of fentanyl, our whole somewhere less than 19 kilograms going into the States. And we have to call the person in charge of that program the fentanyl czar. Now, I'm pretty sure may have been the assistant commissioner of the RCMP or whatever was what we called him before, but Trump says we have to call him the fentanyl czar.
And so we are.
Just have a victory.
Yeah. Well, with the tariffs, he's certainly causing chaos worldwide. And when I see the president of the United States causing chaos, you have to think chaos is the plan.
I think you're quite right.
It's almost like the United States is isolating itself from the rest of the world. And I think it's very possible that the United States is moving to disappear as the great world power, and other areas will take over. That's what I think is happening to the United States. It's a disaster. The people are divided. The country is massively in debt. There's so much poor health and, just division and anger to the point where, people are talking about a new civil war in the United States. And that's been deliberately created. And that was without Trump, and, now he's back and it's only getting worse, I'm sure.
Well, I refer to Trump as the grand emperor of chaos. And that seems to be what he's doing. But looking at the tariffs, one thing that a lot of people don't recognize is one of the primary causes of the Great Depression in the 1930s was trade wars started by the U.S.
You know what? I'd like to look into that because I'm not sure about that. But let's look into it a bit more and have a talk about it next show.
Right now, but I did find that there was massive trade wars going on because that were primarily started by, I guess it was Wilson, President Wilson.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to look into and see the role that tariffs played or trade disputes in that. Okay. We're going to move on to a couple more topics. The first one is something we've talked about before, and that's the prorogation of our parliament by Justin Trudeau back, I think, in early January. So Mr. Trudeau has now prorogued Parliament until, I think it's March 27th. That's when he says they're coming back. But there's a real question about whether or not his prorogation of Parliament is legal. And there is a court case that is going to begin, well, it's running for 2 days, February 13th and February 14th. So just in a few days from now. And if you Google Canada Justice Centre. So Google Canada Justice Centre, and you'll see a story there. The story is called Federal Court Will Hear Prorogation Challenge. And if you look into that story, there's a place there where you can register to watch the court proceedings as they begin on Thursday and Friday of this week. Now, I don't know when this show is going up, but the federal court will be hearing this on an expedited basis. They heard it very quickly to determine whether or not Mr. Trudeau's prorogation of Parliament is legal. And the reason I think it is illegal is that in 2019, Boris Johnson prorogued the British Parliament in very much the same way as Mr. Trudeau has just done, for no reason whatsoever that was democratic, just the benefit to their own parties. And within a month, the UK Supreme Court ruled that the prorogation was illegal and Parliament was back the next day. So I think it's very possible. I know that in my opinion, not a lawyer, nothing, but in my opinion, this prorogation by Mr. Trudeau was illegal, and I hope that's how a federal court rules. So again, if you Google Canada Justice Centre and look at the story, Federal Court Will Hear Prorogation Challenge, there is a place where you can register and watch the court proceedings this Thursday and Friday, the 13th and 14th.
Well, actually, Jack, I've been looking at that, and there seems to be, without getting into the rationale for the legal arguments, which neither of us are really qualified for, there's a very strong opinion that there's enough differences between the British one and the Canadian court case that it won't be successful. So, it's a real toss-up.
Yeah.
But, there are some good things about the prorogation of Parliament. And one of them is, well, a number of them, they had some very anti-democratic, I guess you could say, bills working their way through Parliament. Now, all of those are cancelled, have to be reintroduced unless the parties unanimously agree to reintroduce them or parts of them. And I'll bring up one that I just got an email from my MP on this, Elizabeth May, that she's in favor of them bringing back the online harms bill, C-63, but just parts of it. Now, there's 4 sections, actually 5, I guess, but 4 sections primarily. 2 of them have to do with what we can think about online harm to juveniles. And, well, I know you're very much don't want to see harm to juveniles and online and the rest of that. But I don't really think, in a sense, that's the real reason for the bill. The real reason for the bill is to bring in some censorship legislation so that they can possibly, if they choose to, tell the ISPs to not allow us to go on the air because they don't like what we said. Now, that's a whole different line of online harm than harming adolescents by exploitation online, etc.
Yeah.
So maybe having a pause on some of these bills and rethinking whether they should go in is a good thing. But I do have a problem. You're quite right.
Prorogation is illegal. The other stuff doesn't matter. Mehdi, any comment?
I think this is a game that they play all the time. And this time, Mr. Poilievre was really taking the whole parliament as hostage, would not allow the procedures to continue. And Mr. Trudeau had no choice but to prorogate in order to create a break here. But you may be absolutely correct that this is maybe illegal. So we already compromise as much as we can in order to keep on our fiction that we live in a democracy. So we allow these things to happen. If you remember, in 2008, when Mr. Harper has a minority government, came to a point that he would have get a vote of non-confidence, and he prorogued the parliament. So this is the same game that they are playing.
And in my opinion, if Canada is a parliamentary democracy, which is what we are supposed to be, then for the Prime Minister to be able to shut down Parliament because Parliament is going to overthrow the government, which is Parliament's right to do, then that has to be crazy. It cannot be allowed. I think that's the bottom line. But Norm is right. There are things that a lot of people may or may not like that will follow from the prorogation. But to me, if it is illegal, then that is how the court has got to rule. And I hope they do rule that it is illegal, and we just take that power away from the prime ministers.